Hello and welcome to another EU4 Basics Guide. This one was requested by one of the patrons, but also I wanted to do one on institutions because I have seen a lot of questions about institutions from beginner EU4 players, and there seems to be a lot of confusion about spawning and developing institutions. So today we are going to take a look at the institutions mechanic in game, and since this is a basics guide, it's going to be more for beginner to intermediate level players. In EU4, there are 7 institutions: Feudalism, Renaissance, Colonialism, Printing Press, Global Trade, Manufactories, and Enlightenment. Let me first start by saying that spawning an institution and developing an institution are two different things. This might seem like a very elementary information for most players, but I saw there was some confusion about it, both in comments here on my videos and on my Discord server. An institution spawns when certain set conditions are met, and we will look at those conditions in a bit. These conditions are very specific and somewhat RNG dependent, so there's a chance you won't spawn an institution. However, you can always develop an institution, and we will talk about developing institutions later in this video. Once you have spawned or developed the institution, you can then embrace it once it spreads to 10% of your nation's development. This gives you a modifier depending on the institution, and also it removes the institution tech penalty, which is the main reason you need to embrace institutions as quickly as possible. So next, we will go over what conditions you need to spawn an institution and what modifiers you can use to spread institutions in your provinces faster, and finally, how do you optimally develop an institution. We will start with feudalism. Feudalism is present in most of the nations. Exceptions are the New World, some African nations, most hordes, and some other nations in Asia. One thing I should mention here is that we will not discuss the New World in this video, as they have to reform the religion first and then get institutions. It's a slightly different mechanic, and you can watch my Aztec guide for how it works. So, ignoring the New World, if you start in one of the nations that doesn't have feudalism, the best way to get feudalism is to take provinces from a nearby nation who already has feudalism. You can also get feudalism by institution spread if a neighboring nation has it, but the spread is too slow and you will fall behind on tech. So the best thing to do is just take those provinces in a war for yourself. And once you have embraced feudalism, it gives you +1 leader without upkeep, which is a great modifier to have. Next institution is Renaissance. Renaissance is the first institution you will see spawned in game. For an institution to spawn, the province needs to fulfill certain conditions, and if those conditions are met, the province has a chance to spawn the institution. If there is more than one province that fulfills the conditions, then they will all get a chance to spawn the institution, and that is the RNG part, and so sometimes you won't get the institution even if you have fulfilled all the conditions. The conditions for Renaissance to spawn in a province are: it has to be in the region of Italy, the province cannot be an island, it should be in a state, and it needs to be either a capital or have development of at least 20. If all these conditions are met and the year is 1450 or later, there's a chance the province might spawn Renaissance. So if you're playing in Italy and you don't spawn it, you can just wait and Renaissance will spread to you eventually. You get some spread modifiers from nearby provinces, and the spread is higher for friendly provinces. Also, all provinces in Tuscany, Venice, and Flanders region gets an extra modifier for spread. You get extra spread modifiers if the province has one of the Latin cultures as well. Now, if you're not playing in the Italy region, there is no way for you to spawn Renaissance. So then it depends where you are in the world, and you will need to figure out if you should wait for Renaissance to come to you organically or should you develop the institution. And again, we will talk about developing institutions later. If you're playing in Europe, then you can sometimes wait and see if Renaissance is spreading your way. If you're right next to the Italy region and the neighboring nation spawns it, then you can definitely wait for it to spread to your provinces. If you're playing someone like, say, France, you can try to ally one of the Italian miners, and if you have a healthy economy, the AI will sometimes offer you the institutions for some ducats. Always accept that offer. But AI is fairly inconsistent when it comes to offering knowledge, and there is no way for a player to influence it, except just improve relations as much as possible and make sure you don't have any loans and the economy is healthy. If you're playing some other nation in Europe, or if you're not playing in Europe at all, it's just better to develop the institution, as it might take a long time for Renaissance to spread to you. And if you delay it for too long, you will fall behind on tech due to institution tech penalty. Embracing Renaissance gives you a permanent -5% dev cost and a -5% construction cost, which are both great modifiers. Also, the province which spawned Renaissance gets an additional local -5% dev modifier. The next institution is colonialism. Colonialism can spawn anytime after the year 1500. The province needs to be in Europe, Asia, or Africa, so it cannot spawn in the New World or Oceania. The province needs to be a coastal province in a state, but not an island. The province also needs to be either in the capital area, or have at least 12 development, or have a coastal center of trade. You also need to have the first exploration idea, quest for the New World, and you need to discover a land province in the New World, that is either in North or South American continents. So in order to develop colonialism, you need to go exploration first and basically lean on the colonial gameplay early. Sometimes though, even if you rush exploration idea and explore the New World, you might not get it, because some other European nation got the conditions fulfilled as well, and you got some bad RNG. But despite the RNG factor here, if you're playing powerful nations like Portugal, Castile, or Ming, you have a very high chance of reliably spawning colonialism. If you are not playing a colonizing nation, then it's almost always better to just develop it. Because even if you're playing in Europe and colonialism spawns in Portugal, it will take a long time to spread to you. There aren't that many spread modifiers for this institution. Once you have embraced colonialism, it gives you plus 10% bonus to provincial trade power, and the province that spawned colonialism also gets plus 5 local trade power modifier. Next comes printing press. This institution can spawn from 1550 onwards. There is a common misconception about this one, that it can only spawn in Germany area, which is not entirely true. Printing press can spawn in a province that is either in the North or South Germany regions, or if the province religion is Protestant or Reformed. The province also needs to be either in the capital state, or have at least 15 dev, or produce paper as trade good. So technically it can spawn anywhere, even in the middle of Africa, if some nation converts to Protestant or Reformed. Printing press has some extra spread modifiers. It will spread faster if the province or the owner is Protestant, Reformed, or Anglican. There is an extra modifier when you hit Diplotech 15, so if you happen to be around whichever nation spawned printing press, you usually don't need to develop it. But if you're far from it and you are not Protestant, Reformed, or Anglican, you will have to develop it on your own. Once you embrace printing press, you get a 5% discount to stab cost modifier, which is great. Also, the province that spawned printing press gets a local plus 10% institution spread modifier. Next one is global trade. Global trade can appear from 1600 onwards. Spawning this institution requires the province to be in the highest value trade node. The game tooltip doesn't tell us what a highest value trade node is, but I think it calculates the sum of local plus outgoing values that you can find in the ledger. The province also needs to be either the capital or a level 2 or level 3 center of trade. And you need to be either collecting from this trade node or have a merchant there. And you need to have the most trade power in that node as well. So since there are very specific conditions for spawning global trade, you can actually stop it from spawning in game by moving your capital. This is not a beginner strat, so we won't discuss it here, but it's fairly straightforward. You can look it up on Reddit or forums. In case you don't spawn global trade in your game, which is likely to happen because English trade node is really strong in most games, global trade has a lot of spread modifiers, and if you have a few level 2 and 3 centers of trade and provinces with a lot of trade power, global trade can just spread to your provinces organically. You might still want to dev up the province with most spread modifiers to speed it up a bit, just to make sure you don't fall behind on tech. After embracing this institution, you get an extra merchant, and the province that spawns global trade also gets a 10% local trade power modifier. Manufactories is the next institution that spawns after 1650. This one is more straightforward in that the province needs to be in the capital area, it needs to have at least 20 dev, and have a manufactory other than farm state or furnace. So while the conditions are less complicated, making it easier to fulfill, it also means there are a lot of nations that will fulfill them, and so it's pure RNG whether you get the institution spawn or not. There are extra spread modifiers if you have manufactories in your province, so you should focus on building as many manufactories as possible before 1650. And you should be building manufactories anyways, they are the best buildings in game right now. Typically, if you have built enough manufactories, you don't need to develop this institution. But same as global trade, you might want to dev it up a bit just to make sure it isn't delayed for too long. Once you embrace manufactories, you get global 10% goods produced modifier, and the province that spawns gets plus 0.5 local goods produced. So you will see a good jump in your income after embracing manufactories. The last institution to spawn is Enlightenment, which spawns after 1700. The spawn conditions are that the province needs to be in the capital area, it needs to have at least 30 dev, and it needs to have either a university building or a Syrian parliament, or it needs to be in Europe and the ruler skill needs to be 5 in all 3 categories. So unless you have a parliamentary form, you need to build a university in every province in the capital area. The spread modifiers for this institution are also dependent on a seat in the parliament and the presence of university. There is also modifier for Diplotech 20 and either a production efficiency advisor or a yearly prestige advisor. Alternatively, you also get significant spread bonus if you have completed innovative ideas. Spawning Enlightenment is also mostly out of your control and it's RNG dependent, so if you don't spawn it, you will need to look at spread modifiers. Although university gives some good modifiers, university isn't really a very useful building, so it's better to just rush Diplotech 20 and hire one of the 2 advisors, preferably the production efficiency advisor, as that gives you better spread modifiers. Or you can just take the parliamentary form. You will need to embrace this institution sooner rather than later, because by 1700 you will be looking for fast expansion, and being bottlenecked by tech penalty is pretty bad. Also, innovative ideas have extra spread modifier, so that's just an additional incentive to take them. In case you missed my video on why innovative ideas are great, go check it out, there's a link in description. The bonus for embracing Enlightenment gives you minus 25% culture conversion cost. This modifier is frequently used by players who are going for 1 culture runs. The idea is to diplobank all game, then culture convert everything after embracing this institution. The province that spawns Enlightenment also gets minus 0.05 monthly autonomy change, which isn't super useful at this point in game. And that's the gist of all institutions in game. One important thing to keep in mind are the global institution spread modifiers. They tend to kind of slip out of mind as we usually focus more on warfare and coring cost, but these modifiers are important as they help you embrace institutions faster and for less cost. The biggest modifier is the Age of Reformation ability. You can use it to spread both printing press and global trade faster. Just make sure you have a lot of true faith provinces. Also, don't forget to switch on the state edict once the province has the institution. Level 2 and level 3 centers of trade also have global spread modifiers, so does stability, which has a scaling modifier, and you get a plus 5% modifier for trading in coffee. There are also modifiers through institution embracement costs. Once at least 10% of a country's autonomy modified development have the institution present, the country can embrace it. This embracement costs 2.5 ducats per development that doesn't have the institution. So overall it adds to a lot, especially later in game when you have a lot of provinces. So modifiers that lower the embracement costs are very helpful. They aren't super necessary to chase though. So far we have talked about how the institution spawns and how it spreads, and I have been mentioning that if you don't spawn it, you need to develop it. So finally let's talk about what that means. It's very simple actually. Just developing a province gives an immediate increase in the oldest institution that isn't present in that province. So when I say develop an institution, I just mean develop the province. It is that simple. The big question here is which province should you develop to get the best bang for your buck, because monarch points are the most valuable resource in game and you need to make sure they are optimally used always. Every time you dev up a province, the institution will go up by 16.66% of the new province development, which is capped at 10% or 60 dev. Those numbers don't really tell us much though. Luckily, this time I didn't have to go deep in calculations, as someone has already done those calculations on the EU4 wiki page. And here's the graph and the table. It shows the starting development of the province and how many monarch points you will need to get an institution from 0 to 100 in that province. The cost ranges from about 2,000 to 2,300 monarch points. A difference of 300 monarch points is pretty significant, and the numbers here tell us that deving up a province with 16 development is the most economical. This is very important information. However, keep in mind this is just the base cost. Every province in game have a development cost modifier. So while this graph gives us a good idea of which province to develop, you will need to consider all the development cost modifiers. You can see all of them right here when you mouse over. You need to keep a few of these modifiers in mind when looking for a province to develop. First is that your capital will always have some cost modifier. A province with farmland gets a 5% discount. A trade good of either cloth or cotton gives a 10% discount. So if you can find a combination of those, you should definitely start developing the institution there. There are also other modifiers to consider, such as a level 2 or level 3 center of trade gives 5 or 10% dev cost discount. Full prosperity gives another 10%. You should enable the state edict to get another 10% discount as well. And there are other global modifiers with certain religions, economy ideas, policy, and national ideas. So clearly there is a lot to consider here when picking the right province to develop. The initial calculations on the base cost showed us that a 16 dev province was the ideal candidate, but that might change with all these different local modifiers. You could make separate charts with different discounts and developments to compare provinces, but I don't think that's really worth the time. My rule of thumb here is to take a province between 12 and 18 development with as many dev cost modifiers as you can find. Once you have the institution developed in one province, you can just wait till it spreads to 10% of your autonomy modified development, after which you will be able to embrace it. Playing anywhere outside of Europe, you will have to develop institutions, so be prepared to spend a lot of monarch points on them. And since you are going to develop institutions eventually, my suggestion is to just do it as soon as they spawn. Just make sure you don't fall behind on military tech and spend all other monarch points on developing the institution. Once you have embraced it, you can make a lot of money by just selling the institution to other friendly countries who can afford it. So there you have it. That is all you need to know about institutions. Now it should be clearer on what spawns an institution and when to wait for the institution to get to you or just develop it yourself. I hope this little guide was helpful. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments down below and I will answer them to the best of my knowledge. You are watching a Radiator's Guide. Thank you for your time and I'll see you all in the next one.